Good morning, everyone. It is good to be here. We have a number of our panelists here with us. Oasis Pro Markets is going to be joining any moment, I believe. With us, Pat LaVecchia as well. I'm Pat O'Meara. I'm the chairman and CEO of Inveniam. I'm super excited to have this esteemed group of panelists as we discuss tokenization of real-world assets. What is the reality of this? How are we going to facilitate distribution on a global scale? And what does that mean? How do we do that? What are the necessary elements we need? Is it going to be a consolidation to a single chain as a mechanism of standardization? Or are we going to live in a multi-chain world and see other standards develop? And what are those standards going to be? And how are we going to achieve ubiquity and interoperability in a multi-chain world, in a multi-jurisdictional reality that we live in, where we have investment vehicles pulling investments from people all over the world? And so there's a lot to be done here, and we have for us to achieve this outcome. And to do that, we brought folks from all over the world with us today, and we're excited to have everybody here. And Rachel, we're going to start with you, if you don't mind. Would you tell us, give us 2 minutes on yourself and SDAX and what you guys are doing, and give all of the attendees a little bit of an introduction, if that's okay?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Pat. Thanks to the Inveniam team for having us on again on your webinars. My name is Rachel Chia. I'm the acting CEO of SDAX. We're a Singapore regulated based secure investment and exchange platform. What we facilitate is the fractionalized investments into private markets and alternatives. So private debt, private equity, private funds, and also alternative assets like real estate and fine art and luxury wines. So that's what we facilitate. And this whole conversation about multi-chain tokenization is something that's very thematic now, and very excited to be working with partners such as Tokeny to kind of advance the progress of this multi-chain stuff in the tokenization space.
Rachel, thanks so much, what a great introduction. Luke, we're going to throw it over to you, brother, since you were mentioned by Rachel. Rachel, you're joining us from Singapore, and thanks for joining us so late in the day. Luke, with your introduction, why don't you just kind of say where you're calling in from?
Sure. So I am Luc Falampin, CEO at Tokeny. I'm calling from Luxembourg. So it's great because we are between Asia and the US. So for us, it's usually convenient. So we are the leading enterprise-grade tokenization platform. So we help financial institutions to represent their assets on the blockchain. On which blockchain, whatever, EVM blockchains, technically speaking, but any kind of EVM blockchains. And thanks to this, we are working more and more with partners, with distributors, with exchanges, to make sure that as an issuer, you can distribute everywhere where you need, where it's relevant for your assets, thanks to blockchain interoperability. We really see blockchain as a layer, as a shared IT infrastructure, and we help people to use it without technical complexities.
Got it. Thank you so much. And Luke has been a leader in this space for years. We're super pleased to be partnered with them. And Luke has been doing an excellent job of iterating at speed with working code, right? And that matters, right? Because a lot of people are iterating with behind a closed door, and there's a differentiation between the two, right? And Luke, you guys have been leaders in this market, so I just want to say congratulations again on all that you're doing. Martin, I'd love for you guys are to go next. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and tell us about Montis Group. And you guys are a newer entrant to the field, and tell us about where you're calling in from as well.
Absolutely. Many thanks for that, Pat. And there's a wonderful segue, because although I'm located in the financial centre of London in the Square Mile, 1 block from the Bank of England, actually we've applied and we're setting up the preparation for a CSD, market infrastructure central securities depository based in Luxembourg. So no Tokeny, no Luke's work extremely well, and very pleased to have an ongoing dialogue with them. From our side, Montis is part of the Archax Group. Archax was the FCA's first ever permissioned for digital securities MTF broker and custodian. And it's actually through the frustration of trying to actually get access to the existing incumbents for CSD services that they asked me to come on board, and with the team around me to build and apply for the license for CSD. So key bit there is most important to us is around the integrity of the issuance and also the protection of the investor. Those are the two key aspects, and within that, in the middle of what a CSD does is most critical is a securities settlement system. So I've been in this industry 30 years and I'm helping to bridge from the conventional across to the tokenized world. And the tokenized to us comes in two formats: the non-native digital, that's tokenizing the underlying, and then the natively digital, where under Luxembourg law, you can issue a security directly onto a blockchain to record, hold, transfer, settle. It's where we're going. And now we're getting cash coming on chain as well. Over to you, Pat.
Yeah, it's thanks so much, and we're gonna come to you in a little bit about with some questions on why do we need a digital CSD? What is the role that it plays in a blockchain world? And we're going to come to that as we talk about this, and who needs to use it, who are your customers, and then who are the beneficiaries, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and how does that infrastructure play, and how does that work with an exchange and a tokenization platform, et cetera. But also, what is this movement of a digital asset as it interfaces with the regulatory regimes in multiple locations? And you just mentioned Luxembourg and Singapore are two of the great places where there's a lot of regulatory clarity. But then also we want to talk about India, right? And Sean, in Gift City, there's some really cool new regulation. Gift City is a unique location within India itself. But tell us a little bit, Sean, about yourself, and tell us about your jurisdiction that Terazo is operating in India.
Hi, Pat and everyone. Great to be here with all of you. So yes, I'm in India. I think it's a very exciting time to be doing this. I feel very excited about the prospect of asset tokenization, the technology that it brings. The fact that it allows people like us to take part in such a big, important movement is in itself very exciting. And we're also very excited to work with Tokeny on this, with Inveniam on this. So, it's been a great ride. We are working in the jurisdiction of IFSCA in India, which is an offshore jurisdiction recently created to bring cross-border businesses, and it's got a very progressive regulator, and we, I believe, have been given under the regulatory sandbox. We're the first company in India to be able to tokenize a real estate asset. So that itself, it's been a long journey, and we worked with the regulators very patiently, and they very patiently worked with us to make this possible. I think they understand that, they conceptually like the idea of giving access to private market securities and democratizing it, and while at the same time making sure that investor protection is upheld. So with that, I've been in the real estate business, but now very quickly transitioning into I don't know what business to call this, but partly asset tokenization, and we're looking to bring more assets, tokenize more assets, private equity, real estate, and other interesting assets where we believe curation of the assets will play a key role, and tokenization will allow us to get those assets to a global audience.
Yeah. Sean, I think the work you're doing as a pioneer in India is fantastic. It's great to be partnered up with you, that's an easy segue to Sanjay Vatsa, who is the president of Inveniam International, who's done so much good work maintaining relationships with everybody here on this screen. Pat, hello, welcome. So Sanjay, why don't you give us 2 minutes real quick on what you do here at Inveniam and the role that you play in bringing these various players together for projects that seek to access digital distribution globally.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Pat, and thank you all for participating. Really appreciate it. I'm president of Inveniam International. A lot of you know me. Martin, I have not met with you. I know Archex pretty well, and of course your major investor Aberdeen. And of course, Pat Lavakia and Luke are friends, and Sean is a client of ours. So thank you very much for that. So what I do is I head Inveniam internationally. We do believe that internationally, Inveniam has a bigger role and a very big role to play as the digital infrastructure for private assets, providing transparency, trust, auditability, and traceability on the underlying assets. So we have a bigger role to play. If you look at Singapore, you've got, Rachel, you're going to correct me. I think there are 9 digital asset exchanges there today, and there may be another 2 more coming up very soon. If you look at what's happening in Gift City, they are not only that they are agreeing on the tokenization side. I just came out of 3 meetings today where they're going to be tokenizing real estate assets. They're also starting on art, tokenizing the art with all the museums and the galleries here. So that's very interesting. So my role is very simple, is to ensure that we can get private assets to be adopted on a global basis by providing the infrastructure to all the individuals in this call and to other clients we're working with, and to bring our ecosystem into place. So if Sean wants, or if, like I talked about that art, they would like to understand who is the tokenization provider they can go with, what digital asset exchanges we can go with, which will be approved by the IFSC in the next 4 to 6 months, we can bring those players into play so that we can give the entire ecosystem as master contractors to the end clients so that the adoption of digital asset exchange grows up. The opportunity in this country is huge. It is anticipated, and I was listening to numbers, so don't quote me out here, that at least $200 to $400 billion will be tokenized over the next 2 to 4 years. And so let's see where that goes. But all the road assets, which are about $150 billion, are lining up. Art is being lined up. Sean can talk about the real estate and the opportunities there, and on feeder funds. So yes, so our Inveniam, even though we are focused on the infrastructure, our data operating system for private assets and giving you transparency, we also help to orchestrate the adoption by bringing our partners into play. And that's what our role is. Our role is both. We're just not singularly focused. We are focused dually so that we can service the end client end to end.
Thanks.
I hope this time I answered your question.
Thanks, Sanjay. And with that, Pat, I'm gonna throw it to you. Welcome. Thanks for joining us on this group. Pat Lavakia is a good friend, CEO of Oasis Pro Markets. Pat, I'm going to turn it over to you, brother. Give us kind of the 2-minute Pat Lavakia Oasis Pro story.
Sure. Thank you, Pat. And thank you for inviting us, Oasis Pro, on this panel. Obviously, we're close to Inveniam, big fans of Inveniam, and of Tokeny. We're a founding member. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but we're working closely with Tokeny on their T-Rex and standards, which is really exciting. And they've been real thought leaders in regards to security linked tokens, and that's what real world assets eventually will be required to have, at least most. And SDAX we know really well. Martin, we haven't connected with you, but certainly we know the Archex guys well. And but Oasis Pro is a global fintech firm. We have several verticals. We have subsidiaries in Switzerland. One is being established right now in the BVI, potentially other venues in other parts of the world. And what we have is we have a transfer agent here in the U.S. Think of us as really U.S. centric for this particular panel. So we have a cap table management system outside the U.S., but we have that. We have a primary marketplace, and we also have a secondary trading platform. Here in the U.S., we have the license for what's called an ATS, similar to MFS, et cetera. And it depends on what venue you're in, but similar to what SDAX has in Singapore as well. And really, everything in our, again, I call ourselves fintech. We're really blockchain focused, and we're all about the tech. It's not about crypto. But we have the abilities to, here in the US and outside the US, to do stablecoin for digital security, atomic swaps. That means instantaneous transactions. We can do CBDCs. We've built our entire system on that, as well as fiat. And we're API driven. A lot of people say that, but ours is really institutional grade, made for large infrastructure players. So as we look at the multi-chain world and partnering with for instance, the panelists on this call, and we're already integrated with Inveniam and others, and Tokeny. The way we see the market growing on a global basis is with large infrastructure players. So for instance, we're integrated with FIS, or in process of integration. FIS is one of the largest fintech providers in the world, large, many billions of dollars market cap, publicly traded company. And we're working with them in regards to providing our verticals into their ultimate distribution channels or customers. We're also integrated with one of the largest money center banks in the world. We're also integrated, which will be announced soon. We're also integrated with one of the largest transfer agents in the world, fully integrated. We're their solution. So that's the approach we're taking, working in building the ecosystem with the partners such as on this panel, but really integrating with the large infrastructure players so this market can really take off. And it's not a question of if, but when. And we are really about positioning ourselves for when the when happens by being integrated with not only the panelists on this particular webcast, but also the large infrastructure players globally.
Thanks, Pat. And you're right at the end of your comments. We had our 8th panelist join us. Rachel, thank you for bringing the extra panelist in your cat showing up on screen. That was awesome. But I'm going to use this as an opportunity. If we talk about this, right? Sean as somebody who is tokenizing real estate, Luke as an infrastructure tokenization platform, the SDAX and Oasis Pro as ATS platforms for trading, primary and secondary distribution, and Martin as a CSD as part of the Archax group. We have this ecosystem, and Inveniam playing our role of feeding the data throughout so that the tokens are high functioning. You have the access to the data and you're connecting those assets into the token, right? When we think about this ecosystem that we're building, we're looking at this in the sense of an evolution. And I used an example on LinkedIn where Tower Records used to be the tip of the spear for music, right? And everybody used to love to go to a Tower Records, and you could spend an enormous amount of time looking through the vinyl, and then you look through the cassette tapes, and then through the CDs. And if you used to have a card, there was a bar scan code that they would go, and they would give you other like music, and you could listen to it. And it was just a great place to be, when I was in high school and then in college. But the reality is, distribution, it handled the move from vinyl to the move to cassettes to the move to CDs. But the move to digital, even though it had a digital player, it added no other value than having brick and mortar stores It was not involved. They had a music label that got spun out. It became separate, right? But it was not involved in the creation, production, or distribution digitally. And we're going to see financial services change because the point of distribution for financial products and how people store value is going to change, right? You're not going to go at the retail level into a bank branch anymore, right? You're going to literally go and do that off of your laptop, off of your phone, and how people seek distribution is going to transform. And so this promise of distribution built on the back of efficiency and finality and speed is something that is a new promise. But that promise doesn't come true unless you can play that vinyl record on any record player you buy. Does that make sense? Not just the record player of that you bought from that one store, right? You have to be able to have a mechanism of an ecosystem supporting financial instruments so that they trade on multiple exchanges, they settle and clear, they're on multiple chains. And the question is, how are the big financial asset managers, creators, structurers going to reach the buying masses in the future? And if they're not digital, they're not going to get them. Coinbase and Robinhood and the market share that they have captured digitally has been epic. The question is, how does everybody else go and plug into these new digital channels? And Sean, I'm going to start with you. As we think about this, why did you want to tokenize a real estate asset? I mean, what was your core fundamental desire to tokenize? Why do you want to do it first? And secondly, what's it going to do to your business in 20 years?
So that's a great question, Pat, and I think this is the reason why we're all here. I think we all understand that private market securities have fundamental issues, access, entry barriers, and liquidity. And I think if you look at any asset, private asset, you struggle first to raise funds. Typically, if you're raising equity, you want to work with the smallest number of people. You want them then to cut the largest check possible. And typically in private market investments, those investments are locked in for the duration of the project or investment period. And when I learned about asset tokenization, the concept of it maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I was very fascinated. At that point, I only remained fascinated without any clue that you would someday play some small part in how that journey goes. But I think it allows private, smaller issuers to really raise capital more efficiently. It allows investors who can understand the risk profile and investment to diversify their portfolios, really democratize access into private market securities. While we understand that public securities will be regulated in a certain way, private securities will likely not. So our job really is going to be to curate really high quality private opportunities, tokenize them, add layers of information which are traditionally not available to investors, such as the ones that we hope to bring with Inveniam's platform, to really bring investment, all the data around the investment so that the asset can be correctly priced. So I think we see this as a really exciting opportunity to bring different kinds of assets and make them available to investors. And while we started with real estate, the other low-hanging fruit seems to be private equity, because it seems to suffer from the same kind of issues that real estate does. So we are trying to, starting with a proof of concept of a real estate asset, we're very excited to be building a stream of other assets to tokenize. And I think tokenization is, as everyone here believes, it's a matter of when it becomes really mainstream and not if. So we really want to be we want to take as many steps as we can to look at some of the best assets that we can tokenize.
So Luke, so Sean seeking to bring these assets and find the democratization and have a better mechanism to scale and gain access to capital in the most efficient manner. He became a client of yours, right? Talk about Tokeny. Talk about the role that you believe you play as an infrastructure player, and also talk to us about the role that you play as an infrastructure player by jurisdiction. Are you jurisdiction agnostic, or do you have to behave in different ways in different jurisdictions? What does that mean for your partners, how people relate to you, and what is the role that you and Tokeny play in creating an instrument that actually will work in multiple jurisdictions?
Sure. So I will say that we have the easy job because we are the tech provider, so we're not the operator. So we don't need the licenses and we don't need to justify everything we do all the time. However, we need to make sure we bring the right tools to our clients and partners so they can fulfill their obligations. And of course, when you work with licensed entities, it's not always easy. There's some concepts that are a bit abstract sometimes. So we are a tech provider, and our role is really to make sure that everybody can benefit from this blockchain infrastructure in a simple way. So what we provide is APIs, is white label interfaces, where any operator can perform operations. So you don't need to understand anything about blockchain. You can perform what you're supposed to do as an issuer, as an agent, as an exchange, whatever, thanks to our tools. You can automate operations and delegate things to anyone who is authorized to perform something for you. So we don't intend to remove intermediaries or to totally disrupt the value chain. Not at all. We are an enabler. So depending of the project, of the jurisdiction, of the different stakeholders, we advise on how to set up the tool. And to make sure that depending what you're authorized to do, you can do these things or access some information. So the infrastructure is shared, but you can still manage permissions on this infrastructure, and I think it's very important to understand.
Yeah, and the permissions and the infrastructure, and we're going to get to standards in just a moment, but that gets directly to what you're talking about, because as you issue these tokens, they need to be traded on platforms, right? And your clients, and you said we're not disintermediating the traditional players. Technology is disintermediating them. Time is disintermediating them, and you're the mechanism by which they ensure that they're not disintermediated, right?
Exactly.
Because they already have a role. The question is, will they evolve with the new technology, and do they have the ability to maintain that middle function they perform in a new technology environment, right? And so you're that mechanism to do so, where these tokens can exist on a primary issuance and a secondary issuance basis. And Rachel, I think I'm going to bring that to you, where we talk about Singapore, like Luxembourg, has become a regulatory nexus where people are coming to Singapore in order to seek broad regional distribution, right? We have American players coming in. Sanjay was with you in person, I think, yesterday, right? To be with you to talk about how do we bring clients who want global distribution to an Asian Pacific world participating in this digital reality, and talk about SDAX and the role that you play in achieving this global distribution opportunity, and kind of the role that you specifically think that you play in that. Aware, Rachel, that as you're the acting CEO, you are a lawyer, right? And by training, and how do you provide that structure where people can do so in a regulatory compliant manner?
Sure. So yeah, I think at SDAX, we have really benefited from Singapore's regulatory regime, which has been really progressive. I think it's been one of the few places where it's been very clear how the regulators view this whole tokenization journey. And I have worked on like other international cross-border transactions in the blockchain space in other projects, and I did experience the kind of like legal confusion there was in like some of the European jurisdictions. And there was another project where I spent almost $1 million just on legal fees in the US. So I really very much appreciate the clarity that the MES has given by kind of being very clear about how they look at this whole industry. And that's why they've been progressive in also giving licenses to the right platforms. So in Singapore, it's been a very tech agnostic way of regulating security tokens, because it looks at it as securities or fund units, and we're regulated under the Securities and Futures Act. There is no additional like DLT law or tech related law. And that provides a lot of clarity because it's very much substance over form. And because of that, I think it's been a lot easier to kind of navigate how we should classify security tokens. Because for us, tokenization is a tech overlay. It's a tech overlay to facilitate more efficient distribution, settlement, clearing, and also trading. Because by constituting the cap table management onto blockchain, it allows for instant settlement, and therefore instant settlement of trades on an exchange. So by focusing on the private markets opportunities in Singapore, like and all the asset classes that the other panelists have kind of talked about, real estate, private equity, things which have traditionally not been accessible to other to individuals, it's primarily been the mainstay of very large family offices, very large institutions. It's just not been available to many others. I mean, we're just harnessing the power of tokenization and this tech that is to allow for more efficient distribution of this. I mean, frankly, fractionalizing is not a new concept. Fractionalizing has been around for a long time, right? Each time you buy a share in a company, it's a fractional investment into a company. But yeah, together TradFi and public markets, we have seen the involvement of many parties, many agents, many different players, and it makes it. I mean, it's grown to be this huge animal that's become quite cumbersome as well. And they still don't have instant settlement. Whereas now, because of how blockchain has developed, we're able to kind of cut through all that, learn from the infrastructure of how the public markets have developed, and kind of like take the best bits and use it in kind of develop this new world of private markets and alternatives kind of investments in this space.
And I think as we think about fractionalization, and we think about fractionalization that had a longer settlement time, we can do this instantaneous settlement. And sometimes it's not instantaneous, but we're taking 45-day settlement for whole loans down to maybe 2, right? Where we're atomizing functions within that settlement chain that are still going to require human processing in our current state, right? So they're speeding up as we take steps along the way. But also, it's fractionalization with atomization, because it used to be you could buy a piece of a REIT that had 100 buildings or 200 buildings. Now you're going to be able to build your own REIT that has a piece, and you're going to be able to say, I want this building, this building, this building, and not any of the other ones, right? So people can't bury junk inside of a portfolio that you have to buy a piece of. Think CDO, CLO, et cetera. But how do you construct these portfolios? I think that atomization within the settlement and fractionalization is where all of a sudden we're going to get a whole new ability to slice and dice. And Pat, you have investors, and I'd use Redwood as an example, who've been in RMBS, right? They've been putting together large pools together. And now all of a sudden you're going to bring to them new technology capabilities, the ability to distribute, the ability for secondary sales, and this atomization. Talk to us a little bit about how your investors who've come into you and said they want access and they want distribution access into the US through an ATS where they can start to construct and distribute new types of product that are, as Rachel said, are the same kind of substance of what's been before, but this technology is allowing new ways to slice and dice. Talk about a little bit about why these guys said, I want to be an investor in Oasis Pro.
Sure. And I'll also, I didn't mention this earlier, but one of the largest private equity firms in the world, fund families, joined our cap table about a month ago as well. We haven't announced it yet. So I'll talk about both of them. but Redwood specifically, it starts with cost savings for the issuer. So by cost savings, meaning the back office costs of just distributions. So dividends and coupon payments for funds, it's distributions. And, you know, if you could do it wallet to wallet, KYC, AML, then you have the ability that you don't have to recheck wires, double check addresses, right? Go through that whole process every quarter or, you know, semi-annually, et cetera. And there are costs associated with that. There's teams in-house. There's also third-party vendors. So in regards to several of our discussions with a variety of our MBS players, their savings expectations over time, once tokenization really takes a hold, and they, you know, you're not going to replace third-party vendors overnight, right? But they estimate that's 20 to 35 basis points, which is a big number when you're a large issuer, right? So that is the primary motivation. Also, documentation. So we're working with groups like Intane and Liquid Mortgage, who provide a lot of the documentation for mortgages, and also moving into ABS. So a lot of that documentation right now is still manual, emails, et cetera, or, you know, utilizing a central depository like a Dropbox online. Once that's built into the smart contracts, again, it'll make it much easier in regards to due diligence on the part of investors coming in. Now, in regards to fractionalization, your question there. So point one, the motivation is cost savings. Let's move it on to fractionalization. Fractionalization, which here in the US at least is several years out, we're really focused on institutions. Eventually and all the way down to retail. Eventually it'll be in retail like Robinhood, to your point, and Coinbase. But our approach is it's going to be a waterfall from the institutions once that credibility is built, and then the retail will be there, especially with the regulatory overlay here in the US. But what RMBS issuers, what they're issuing today is what's called 144A exempt securities, okay? So that's institutional only. That's what's called qualified institutional buyers, or QIBs. That's 100 million in assets, et cetera. So retail has no access to it, absolutely zero. So eventually with tokenization, again, I'm not saying this is next year, you know, this may be a decade from now or sooner, is to grow their investor base, right? Away from institutions into high net worth retail, which could be really exciting because, you know, it's further diversification for individuals. By fractionalizing an RMBS to the ability for an individual to invest in it, that enhances what Redwood's motivations, right, in regards to growing their investor base, which could translate into lower yields that they need to pay out, right, by a large. So that's the motivation. Same thing with this large private equity fund at the end of the day. Back office savings initially, right, in regards to, again, think about it as wallet to wallet. And at the end of the day, wallet, you know, once we get wallets out of the way, nobody's talking about wallets. You know, we've hit nirvana in this industry, because the UI experience should be no different from what everyone expects today or experiences today. So once it gets to that point, you know, it'll be a flood, right? But wallet to wallet, the ability to go down that process it's really what's motivating this. And for this large private equity group, again, cost savings initially, probably over the next couple of years, maybe sooner, and then broadening access, further distribution for their funds, the ability to move away necessarily from pension funds, you know, the largest investors at this point in time. And that's a motivation. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely, brother. And I think your comment about wallets out of the question is when we hit nirvana, and that's going to really go into, we're going to go around a speed round shortly on standards. But Martin, let me talk to me about that. And does wallets out of the way lead into a discussion about who you are, right? How does custody relate to a digital CSD? Why do we need a digital CSD when we have blockchain, right? And we can instantaneously settle. And what kind of regulatory interface does a digital CSD provide as real world assets want to live on the blockchain?
Thanks, Pat, and absolutely, I'll do that. I'll give you a sort of a current state and a future state as we see a sort of 5-10 year type horizon, because it's all moving very fast. Let me first pick up on the let's call it domestic versus global type perspective. The reason we're setting up in Luxembourg is because the laws allow us to be a central account keeper once we're authorized and to operate a CSD service there, which means that we can be involved in an issuance which contains a hybrid of conventional and tokenized securities. To take Pat's comment, when we do get to wallet not being part of the discussion, I'm absolutely with you. We are ubiquitous at that stage, because you've moved away from the relevance of where do I hold it, how do I hold it, and you're just saying I hold it. No one today bothers too much around where do you hold your securities. No one cares whether it's under your bed as a certificate or if it's in a custodian, in an omnibus or a segregated account. Not relevant. And that's where we're going to move to. But from our side, we started first on Luxembourg because the laws allow you to do it. There's a couple of other countries in Europe who allow you to do a fair chunk, but Luxembourg's the most advanced, as Luke and I both know extremely well. Where Rachel is, trust me, the moment we get our authorization, or maybe even before, I'll be on a plane, because Singapore MAS is very, very aligned to introducing digital securities, very advanced in its thinking, very open, but also the other side, careful and prudent around what they're doing, because if you go too fast, you can actually get it horrendously wrong. And I think the balance is exactly right. So from our perspective, first, it is identifying how are we going to coexist, because we're in the current state, Pat, and we're sitting here saying, so today I could have a bond, I could have a fund, I could have equities as well, but that's a reasonably advanced market. I know the ATS ECN side, the way Pat does, it's very familiar. But if you go to the markets, we can make the bigger moves first. It's bonds, it's funds, and it's very much around the fact I can have an issuance which I held conventionally. But equally, that's got to stay on the existing payment rails. It's got to go through the traditional way. I can tokenize the same bond. I can have it digital representation where it never gets materialized. It never changes state and so on. It sits with a CSD. I'll come to why a CSD in a sec. But that, at the moment, also has to go through the traditional payment rails. So there are some limitations there. But we are looking at dynamics which get us to project forward, even in today's world, whereby, except for a 90-minute window, there's the potential that we could be able to settle DVP Model 1 on a 24/7, less 90 minutes. So that type model we could see evolving, but it's one we can accommodate today in the current world, but only in certain countries. And that's where you start to say the threat to the global financial centers is that this new asset class or new group of asset classes does not have to sit in the traditional markets that it currently sits. It will go in ones where it's got the confidence, the scale, the appetite, and the willingness to invest. But it's the ones where the laws and the regulations are willing to do it, and that's why, you know, a huge step forward on SDAX. Looking at why do you want a CSD? Our role came about, and in the future we're not going to be called a CSD. I'm pretty convinced, because it starts with the word central. The whole aspect behind it is we were brought in to address the fact that during the 80s, I know there were a couple of CSDs brought in the 1960s. That was obviously because of auto trade, which the anniversary day is today, by the way, of auto trade. It's 60 years, I think, since the first auto trade bond came through. But the markets in the 1980s, so much paper was going through that couldn't be processed because it was all manual. And you had places in New York which were known as, I think they were caves, or they were more like prisons, where people were just stuck in rooms and paper was fed in, and they couldn't process as much paper as they received each day. So it just piled up. Same over in the UK, where we had the big bang to electronification. All that stepped forward, but it kept within the confines of the intermediaries, the processes, and so on. Now I want to take you future state. So current laws allow us to record this on a blockchain. Fantastic. Now take your multi-chain concept. We see that the fact today is the laws and the regulations and the courts require that you have a CSD to provide the investor protection and so on. You also have a custodian, you have a transfer agent. All that data can sit on the same, and you have Inveniam. All that could sit on the same ledger. And so long as it's permissioned and partitioned, we access our information. It's all in one place. Where's your reconciliation? You don't need it. We're all working off the same data. You'll need a replication because of security and resilience, but that's fine. But take me forward 5-10 years. What stops? And I'll stick with financial institutions first. What stops JP Morgan and Citi? One operating on Ethereum, the other operating on Algorand. And one says, I want to buy, the other says, I want to sell. That state change between those two chains changes the state in what's currently a CSD, in our record, but it's the market's record. And everyone sees that state has changed instantaneously with the trade. You can still do stock lending and borrowing. You can still do shorting. You can still have your equilens and the equivalents, and you've still got a role for your CCP, but it modifies, it changes the dynamic. But that world where you're sitting there, as you can today on your smartphone, and you can buy and sell, behind the scenes, it still doesn't move the way it should. But in 5 to 10 years' time, the technology already allows you to do it, and the regulations and legislators will become familiar. It will become ubiquitous in that way.
You know, Martin, one of our earlier patents, you know, we have around 75 patents. I think patent 16 for us was, how do we utilize a multi-chain world in order to envision a single chain, right? Where we can resolve multiple chains in a similar to an arrayed server structure, which also is how a secure cloud works, right? Secure cloud, when a server goes down, a portion of the cloud does not go down. That happens all the time. The resiliency and backup functionality works when you take a single server from an arrayed server, even though it only did, let's say there's 6, you take that away, one of them, even though it only did 1/6 of all the trades, it has the ability to recreate every trade there, right? And this is the ability to have a redundancy in a multi-chain world. Now, Martin, you talked about auto trade. This is the 60th anniversary. Now, Sanjay, you were 25 when that went into effect. Is that right? I'm not sure exactly.
No, I don't know. Something like that.
It's something like that. I'm
That's
sorry.
harsh.
That is harsh. I'm sorry, brother. And when in these evolution moments that are big evolutions, as far as where the volume, the capacity to transact volume has these step changes, and I believe that's what we're coming to. But one of the things that you need to handle volume is standards or protocols, so that the volume doesn't need, so you have a mechanism of homogeneity, right? As we look at right now, we've got Singapore and we've got Luxembourg and we've got Gift City, right? And we've got various jurisdictions. Sweden has some really cool stuff that's in place right now. You know, Gibraltar has some cool stuff that's in place, so we can look at these different jurisdictions. But when we're going to have this be a global reality, why do we need standards? Why do we need protocols, and how are they going to develop? Right? I mean, you've been a part of this in your whole career, and because of time, we only have 12 minutes left. I want to go one more time. Tee this up for us, Sanjay, in a speed answer. What are the standards that we must have for global distribution to become a reality with all these different types of players in here, right? Where we get buy-in, and how's that going to come about?
So I think standards is a means of communicating across platforms, across chains, and across the full trade life cycle. If you can communicate through interoperability and everything else, standards go away. And if we are going to rely on standards for digital asset adoptions to happen, and I'm teeing it up, it'll take us another 15 years to get there, because standards have, even for the capital markets on the financial service space, has taken 25 to 30 years to get there. So it's upon us to create that common lingua franca or language that we can communicate with each other so they can build interoperability. Standards was used as the way in saying, if I'm going to send you a trade message and it's going to come electronically, my 72D field means this is what you should settle and where you should settle, right? And that was what it was communicated, because everyone was throwing out different things. But that time systems were not configurable. Today's systems are configurable. So the use of the need for standards to get digital adoption going, and I'll pose it right back to the thing, is not a necessity in my opinion. It's a good thing to have, but it's not going to stop the digital adoption if we have interoperability and we have a lingua franca communicating down the line. That's it.
And Luke, I'm going to go to you with this lingua franca, right? You guys created ERC 3643, which is the only standard for securities that the entire Ethereum community has adopted, and a consensus was achieved and assigned a standard number, right? There's a bunch of people who they have their own standards, but they haven't been adopted. Talk to us about 3643. Why did you create it, and what is your hope it's going to deliver?
It's a long process to make a standard accepted by the Ethereum community, which is good, I guess. It forced to have some quality. So we created this standard maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, because our clients needed it and we couldn't find any other one. As simple as that. And indeed, we standardized the process. So now, coming back to your previous question a few minutes ago, it is a global standard. You can apply this standard in any jurisdiction, and you can also deploy it on any EVM blockchain. So a lot of different blockchain networks. So we think it's great. We have built our tools or software on top of this open source standard, and now we are launching this non-profit association to promote this standard. So of course we have Oasis Pro and many other archags joining this association, Inveniam obviously. So we think it's great because it's basically a way to bring everybody around the same table and to make sure that we are building on top of a standard, of a common ground, and not reinventing the wheel, each of us on our side. It's what we saw in the past few years, that the largest financial institutions started to build their own thing. And step by step, they're like, oh, it works approximatively, but we are alone on our tools, on our network, on our way to process. So now they want to open to the ecosystem, and to do that, there is the ERC 3643 standard, which is somehow a bridge between different financial institutions, different providers, different distribution networks, different blockchain networks. It's really how we position it. And thanks to the association, we'll make sure that we create a full toolbox for anyone who wants to tokenize asset in a compliant way. So toolbox in terms of technical aspect, legal, operational, everything at the same place, freely accessible. So everybody can bring new business applications and not restarting at the layer 0, where we are like, okay, what's a smart contract and how can I transfer it to someone else?
Absolutely. And tell me about we have 7 minutes left, so aware of that. Rachel, I'm going to give it to you. For you and you to scale, and for things to be listed in the UK and the US and Singapore and in Gift City, talk to me about interoperability. Talk to me about standards. How important is this?
Actually, I wanted to talk about multi-chain. So,
okay, talk about multi-chain.
My own question. Because I wanted to talk about multi-chain and how I think this is so important for platforms like ours. A lot of us started with private chain because that's how we developed, that's how we kind of cut our teeth on it, and that's how some of our regulators preferred that we set up. But the future is multi-chain. An exchange does not have to be a single chain exchange, and that's not how I see SDAX's future. And I'm very convinced that we have to grow as a multi-chain platform, and that's why we're working with people like Look at Tokeny to kind of like test this and kind of prove it to our regulators that this is where it should go. And I think regulators are slowly understanding that as well. So even though Singapore does not regulate I guess, what we call a token standard. And because it's in line with the fact that they have taken a philosophy not to be tech agnostic, right? So right now, the tech is just an overlay. They expect certain tech risk management protocols to be in place, but they have not mandated that a certain standard needs to be in place. I think that might change in the future. They might not say that ERC 3643 is the one that we all have to follow, but they might put parameters around what kind of standards tokens will need to adhere to. I think that's probably the more pragmatic approach, where we put in the sense that we have principle-based kind of guidelines around how these tokens should look like, what these tokens standards should be like, without being too prescriptive. Because as we know, tech changes all the time. Kind of advancements move really, really quick. So while Luke's ERC 3643 is, what we want to aim for right now, he might be developing something else quite soon as well. So I guess that's how we need to be nimble, but also understand that it's still very nascent at this stage of our industry, and we are having to test different concepts. But that's how SDAX, this is the view that SDAX takes towards multi-chain. And of course, this all contributes to our general goal of worldwide domination and worldwide distribution, so that when we have standards that apply across, in a very cohesive manner, then it's easier for us to collaborate with that.
And
like,
it's that,
and also Archex,
yeah, and it's that cycle time of iteration, right, where every scientific discourse begins with a thesis that you beat up. And the advantage we have with 3643 is that Luke and his team have the intellectual fortitude to enunciate a thesis that we can all engage on. And it will evolve and it will become better, but it is an iterative process that today we have something to engage with. And so I couldn't agree with you more. Martin, I'm going to give this to you, brother. Give us 60 seconds on when I'm teeing up questions that people are choosing not to answer. So anything you want to say, what is the topic you want to say in this last piece? You're on mute.
You're on mute.
Thanks. One of us had to be at one stage. I think the first thing I'd put up is that from the external networks, external blockchain point of view, we see that very much as being a device-led scenario. I don't care whether you're on Android or Apple, iPhone, or whatever means you are. When I phone you, you can answer and we can talk and we hear each other. That's where the blockchain devices are going. When you then come to the standards, I think there will be a proliferation of standards, but there will be some which dominate, because I think the simple mode will be that some people will be intransigent about moving from what they've got, but I really think what Luke and the team at Tokeny have got and been doing and what they've achieved on Ethereum, I think is absolutely superb. I do think there'll still be a place to a degree for others, ERC20 or ASA with Algorand or other things like that. They will still have a place, but what we'll see is we've got to coexist, and that's where you'll have dominant leadership in certain standards, in the same way as we have with Swift messaging. We've got 15022, which is reasonably well used. We've still got some CSDs using proprietary messaging, and we're moving to 20022, and we're harmonizing on that all the way and forcing that through. So those things start coming together. The difference is, and it goes back to what the Romans did for us, they gave us the laws of property and the laws of possession. And this is what is going to drive it. It's going to be the laws and the regulation and what you can actually do in which jurisdiction. And the markets will polarize to where they can satisfy the demand in the regulatory jurisdiction under the right laws. And that's going to be the driving factor to us, because technically we can harmonize the great work of Tokenys. We can harmonize the different blockchains and the multi-chain. We're already able, with the service that's being built, to connect and interoperate across 7 external networks. But you've still got to, for the short term, because we need to be authorized, centralize on our blockchain first. Over to you, Pat. That was my minute.
There you go. Sean, we have 1 minute that it looks like we're going over, because we're gonna give the final word to Pat LaVecchia. But Sean, talk to us about, from your standpoint, and India now giving authorization for tokenization and leaning in, what are we going to see as India leans into tokenization and into Singapore and into London and into the US using all these pieces of infrastructure? How's this going to impact the financial markets across India per se?
Well, I actually kind of echo what Rachel said. India has taken a stand similar to MAS, where they are not focusing on the technology. They want to make sure that this works well. We gave a demo of 3643 and Tokeny solution to the regulators, and they instantly could understand the features and everything that they would look for in terms of how this should work was done. So I think it's great to see that this is becoming a standard. As you say, this may evolve into something else, but I think keeping this, there are lots of things to deal with, on the regulatory side, the legal side, the technology side. But it's nice to see that there is at least some standardization on some of the technology. I wish there was similar standardization on some of the legal, positions that regulators take, but that may be wishful thinking. We're very happy that Gift City in India has taken a certain position.
Yes. Pat Levecchia, talk to us about how are we going to create the ability for a token to trade, create it on Tokeny, trade on Oasis Pro, move through SDAX, be in an Indian wallet, and settle an interface with traditional regulatory tools or funds today using somebody like SDAX? And how does Oasis Pro play in the middle of that in this ubiquitous role?
I don't think. Thank you, Pat. I don't think we have a half hour more to go through all that. I'll try to do it in about 30 seconds. We're integrating for the ability to do that, right? So if it's offshore, it's much easier because the regulations here in the US are, still being developed at this point in time. But it's all about integration. And once you're integrated, could be a Tokeny smart contract token, right? It'll could be distributed on our ATS here in the US or secondary marketplace outside the US with one of our partners. And then in regards to SDAX, they can also co-list, eventually co-list that particular token as well, or vice versa. So there's a Singaporean issuer. Oh, and then obviously, somewhere in this mix is Montes. And Inveniam is already integrated with us as well. So depending if it's real estate or if it's a fund, there's ability to, mark the mark, which is helpful from a trading standpoint as someone's doing due diligence. So it's all about being fully integrated so that when there's an issuer there, they don't have to question what vendor do I need to talk to, right? It's about a one point of entry, and it could be anybody on this particular panel. So once we get to that point, and I think we're heading in that direction, and I feel very confident about it, that's when you'll be able to see something along those lines. But away from that, I know I'm going a little over. I agree, the multi-chain is critical. We're already, we're about to be fully integrated with 10 chains. We're working with Inveniam on coming up with some interoperability opportunity in working across chains as well. So we've been thinking about this for a long time. And, our approach is there are many chains out there, permission blockchain, public blockchain, permission private blockchains, and fully public blockchains with subnets that all can work. But at the end of the day, it depends on who the issuer wants to work with. So getting that interoperability right. So if you choose to go with Polygon, it's not a problem because, if you could work across different protocols, work with Avalanche as well, right? So that's where, again, it's like UI experience. The user won't care, right? So it's really about the inner workings.
So Sanjay, I think you wisely fled India ahead of the cyclone. that Sean is sitting out, and you are tell us about you've been moving around the world. Give us the final words on this podcast.
So the final words are, Pat, first of all, I fled Ahmedabad. I'm in Delhi, so that you know. So I'm still in India. So otherwise they'll cancel all my meetings tomorrow. The second, I'll say two things. One is, Martin, the CSTs will always be required because they'll be the official book of records. Orange County proved that you cannot do it, and that's a segregation that the regulators will have a very tough time anticipating on it, right? So that's the first word I want to say, and I think that's the thing. The second thing is the lingua franca on common language, the SWIFT 15022, the SWIFT 20022, they all came out so many years ago, still being adopted. Is how you communicate with each other, how you work in it, and how you understand the chain. That's what's going to make the difference, right? Standards, if you're going to wait for standards, not going to happen. And the third point I'm going to make is there's a difference between developed countries and developing countries. The developing countries are looking for financial inclusivity and are looking for democratization of alpha and bringing the mass affluent where wealth is with various people, bringing them into the economy. Like in India, our road minister has said, I want every Indian to own a portion of the road. How does that happen? Through tokenization, through financial, because the expenses are lower, right? In America, the theme is very different, right? It's a developed country. So the developing countries are using digital asset as a way to grow, to make the economy bigger, to be a $10, $15 trillion economy. Very big different objectives, and hence the regulators are shaping their regulation accordingly. And I think I just wanted to end with that.
Guys, thank you, all of you, for taking time to be with us, especially those of you who joined us so late in the day. It's always a pleasure to be with all of you guys. Thanks so much. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all. Great stuff.